Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The click of heels on polished floors echoed through the hallway as Isabella approached the double doors. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the emerald silk draping her curves. The familiar scent of her old high school, a mix of floor wax and chalk dust, brought a flood of memories, not all of them pleasant. She paused, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The muffled sounds of laughter and music drifted from behind the closed doors. For a moment, Isabella considered turning back, retreating to the safety of her car and the life she'd built far from here. But she'd come too far, in more ways than one, to give up now. With a determined set to her jaw, she pushed open the doors and stepped into the gymnasium. The transformation was impressive. Gone were the bleachers and basketball hoops, replaced by elegantly draped tables and twinkling lights. But it was the sudden hush that fell over the room that truly marked how much had changed. Isabella felt the weight of dozens of stares as conversations stuttered to a halt. She caught snippets of whispers, saw the nudges and pointed fingers. Some faces registered shock, others confusion, and a few, she noted with a sinking feeling, unmistakable disgust. "Is that Ian?" The stage whisper carried across the room, and Isabella flinched internally. She'd prepared herself for this, but the reality was still a punch to the gut. Squaring her shoulders, she made her way to the check-in table. The woman sitting there, was it Jennifer? Jessica? Gaped openly, fumbling with the name tags. I don't see an Ian listed," she stammered, cheeks flushing. "It's Isabella now," she said quietly but firmly. "Isabella Winters." Recognition flickered in the woman's eyes, followed quickly by embarrassment. "Oh, of course, I'm so sorry. Here you go, Isabella." She handed over a blank name tag and a marker with shaking hands. As Isabella wrote her name in flowing script, she caught sight of a familiar face approaching from the corner of her eye. Her stomach clenched. Michael Reeves, her best friend throughout high school. The person who knew her better than anyone, once upon a time. And the one she'd lost touch with completely after everything. "Ian?" Michael's voice was hesitant, uncertain. "I mean, Isabella?" She turned, pasting on a smile she didn't entirely feel. "Hi, Michael. It's been a long time." He stood there, clearly at a loss for words. His eyes darted over her, taking in the curves of her body, the expert application of makeup, the cascade of chestnut hair falling past her shoulders. "You look different," he managed, finally. Isabella couldn't help but let out a small, nervous laugh. "That's certainly one way of putting it." The awkward silence stretched between them, years of unspoken words and explanations hanging in the air. Michael opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I didn't know. About any of this, I mean." "I know," Isabella said softly. "I'm sorry I didn't keep in touch. It was a complicated time." Michael nodded, his expression a mix of emotions Isabella couldn't quite decipher. "Do you want to maybe grab a drink? Catch up?" The tension in Isabella's shoulders eased slightly. She nodded, grateful for the olive branch. As they made their way to the bar, she could feel the eyes of their former classmates following them. The whispers continued, but she tried to tune them out. "So," Michael said, as they settled onto bar stools. Tell me everything. What have you been up to for the past 10 years? Isabella took a sip of her white wine, considering where to begin. Well, I moved to the West Coast not long after graduation. Needed a fresh start, you know? I work in graphic design now for a tech company in San Francisco. Michael nodded, seeming genuinely interested. That's great. You always were talented with art. Thanks. Isabella smiled, feeling some of the old warmth of their friendship. What about you? Still in town? Yeah. Took over my dad's accounting firm. Married my college girlfriend. Remember Amy? We've got 2 kids now. That's wonderful, Michael. I'm happy for you. Another lull in the conversation, this one not quite as uncomfortable as before. Michael fidgeted with his beer bottle, clearly working up to something. Isabella, he started, his voice low. I just want you to know, I'm sorry if I ever did or said anything, before. If I ever made things harder for you without realizing it. The sincerity in his eyes brought a lump to Isabella's throat. Thank you, she managed. That means a lot. Before they could continue, a shrill voice cut through the background noise. Well, 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 look who decided to grace us with his presence. Isabella's spine stiffened. She'd recognize that voice anywhere. Brittany Walsh, head cheerleader and self-appointed queen bee of their graduating class. Clearly, a decade had done little to soften her edges. It's her, actually, Michael said, a protective note in his voice that warmed Isabella's heart. Brittany's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. Oh, I'm so sorry, she said, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Didn't mean to offend. So, tell me, Ian, or should I say, Isabella, what made you decide to play dress-up for our reunion? The venom in Brittany's words stung, but Isabella refused to let it show. She turned slowly, meeting the other woman's gaze with steely determination. This isn't a costume, Brittany. This is who I am, who I've always been, even if I didn't have the words for it back then. Brittany's eyes narrowed. Right. And I suppose next you'll tell me you were a woman trapped in a man's body all along? Please. We all remember how you were on the football team, how you dated half the cheerleading squad. Each word was like a dagger, bringing up painful memories of confusion and denial. But Isabella wouldn't let Brittany see how much it hurt. People are complex, Brittany. I was trying to be who everyone expected me to be. It took a long time to figure out who I really am. Oh, spare me the after-school special, Brittany sneered. You know what I think? I think this is just another one of your stunts for attention. Always had to be the center of it all, didn't you? Michael started to interject, but Isabella laid a hand on his arm. This was her battle to fight. You're entitled to your opinion, Brittany, but I didn't come here for your approval or anyone else's. I came to reconnect with old friends and celebrate how far we've all come. If you can't handle that, it says more about you than it does about me. Brittany's face flushed an ugly shade of red. For a moment, it looked like she might explode, but then she spun on her heel and stalked away, muttering under her breath. Isabella let out a shaky breath, her composure wavering for the first time. Michael squeezed her shoulder gently. You handled that amazingly, he said. I always knew you were tough, but damn. She managed a weak smile. Thanks. I've had a lot of practice, unfortunately. As the night wore on, Isabella found herself settling into a strange rhythm. There were more uncomfortable encounters, more whispers and stares, but there were also genuine moments of connection. Her old lab partner, now a research scientist, engaged her in a fascinating discussion about the intersection of art and technology. The shy girl from her English class, now a confident literature professor, thanked her for standing up to bullies back in the day. It wasn't easy, but with each conversation, each small act of acceptance or understanding, Isabella felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. This was why she'd come, after all. Not to relive the past, but to show herself, and everyone else, how far she'd come. As the reunion wound down, Isabella found herself back at the bar, this time alone. She nursed a glass of water, reflecting on the emotional roller coaster of the evening. A movement at her side startled her from her thoughts. "Mind if I join you?" Isabella looked up to see David Chen, another familiar face from her past. They'd run in different circles in high school. David had been more focused on academics, while Ian had been caught up in sports and partying, but they'd always been friendly, sharing the occasional class project or hallway conversation. "Of course." Isabella gestured to the empty stool beside her. "It's good to see you, David." He settled in, ordering a club soda. "You too. You look happy." The simple observation, delivered without judgment or awkwardness, brought a genuine smile to Isabella's face. "I am," she realized. "It hasn't always been an easy road, but I'm finally comfortable in my own skin." David nodded thoughtfully. "That's all anyone can really ask for, isn't it? To be true to themselves." They fell into an easy conversation, catching up on the past decade. David had become a software engineer, working for a startup that developed accessibility technology for people with disabilities. His passion for the work was evident, and Isabella found herself drawn in by his enthusiasm. "What about you?" David asked. "I remember you were always doodling in class. Did you pursue art?" Isabella nodded, pulling out her phone to show him some of her recent design work. As they scrolled through her portfolio, their heads bent close together, she felt a warm spark of connection. It wasn't romantic. David mentioned a long-term partner back home, but it was a genuine human connection, one unburdened by the weight of her past or the complications of her journey. As the last stragglers began to file out of the gymnasium, David glanced at his watch. "I should probably head out. Early flight tomorrow." Isabella nodded, surprised to feel a twinge of disappointment. "It was really great catching up with you, David." He smiled, then hesitated for a moment.
"Listen, Isabella, I just wanted to say, I admire your courage.
Coming here tonight, being your authentic self in the face of, well, everything. It's inspiring." Tears pricked at the corners of Isabella's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." They exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch this time. As David walked away, Isabella felt a sense of peace settling over her. The night hadn't been perfect, far from it, but she'd faced her past, confronted old demons, and come out stronger on the other side. She gathered her things, preparing to leave. As she approached the exit, she paused, taking one last look at the now empty gymnasium. In her mind's eye, she could see echoes of the past. Pep rallies, basketball games, the awkward shuffle of school dances. But those memories no longer held the same power over her. Isabella smiled to herself, smoothing down the fabric of her emerald gown. She was no longer that confused, conflicted teenager trying desperately to fit in. She was a woman who had fought hard to become her true self, who had built a life she was proud of. With her head held high, Isabella stepped out into the cool night air. The future stretched out before her, full of possibility, and for the first time in a long time, she was excited to see where it might lead. As she walked to her car, the click of her heels on the pavement a steady rhythm, Isabella felt a sense of closure. She had come back to face her past, and in doing so, had finally laid it to rest. The whispers and stares, the judgment and confusion, they no longer defined her. She was Isabella Winters, proud and strong, ready to embrace whatever came next. The drive back to her hotel was quiet, the streets of her hometown bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Isabella found herself reflecting on the events of the evening, the conversations that had surprised her, the connections she'd reforged, and the new ones she'd made. Back in her room, she carefully removed her makeup, hung up the emerald gown, and changed into comfortable pajamas. As she settled into bed, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Michael. "Hey, Isabella. Just wanted to say again how great it was to see you tonight. I'm sorry for losing touch all those years ago. If you're up for it, Amy and I would love to have you over for dinner tomorrow before you head back to San Francisco. No pressure, just an offer. Either way, I'm glad we reconnected." Isabella felt a warmth spread through her chest. She typed out a quick reply, accepting the invitation. As she set her phone aside and turned out the light, she realized that coming to the reunion had been the right decision after all. In the darkness of the hotel room, far from the life she'd built for herself, Isabella finally felt at peace with her past. She had faced her fears, stood up to old bullies, and found unexpected allies. More importantly, she had shown herself, and everyone else, that she was no longer defined by who she used to be, but by who she had become. As sleep began to claim her, Isabella's last thoughts were not of the awkward moments or hurtful comments from the reunion. Instead, she focused on the genuine connection she'd made, the understanding she'd found in unexpected places. She drifted off with a smile on her face, looking forward to what tomorrow might bring. The next morning, Isabella woke to sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains. She stretched, feeling a lightness in her chest that hadn't been there the day before. The reunion was behind her now, and while it hadn't been perfect, it had been cathartic in ways she hadn't anticipated. As she went through her morning routine, Isabella's thoughts turned to the dinner invitation from Michael and Amy. A part of her was nervous. Would it be awkward? Would Amy accept her? But another part, a stronger part, was excited for the opportunity to rebuild a friendship that had once meant so much to her. She spent the day exploring her old hometown, marveling at how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. The park where she'd spent countless hours practicing football now had a new playground, but the old oak tree where she'd carved her initials still stood strong. The mall where she'd hung out with friends had been replaced by a trendy outdoor shopping center, but the little bookstore where she'd first discovered graphic novels was still there, its windows filled with colorful displays. As evening approached, Isabella found herself standing on Michael and Amy's front porch, a bottle of wine in hand and butterflies in her stomach. Before she could second-guess herself, she rang the doorbell. The door swung open, revealing Michael's smiling face. "Isabella, come on in." She stepped inside, taking in the cozy home with its family photos and children's artwork adorning the walls. A delicious smell wafted from the kitchen, and Isabella's nerves eased slightly. Amy appeared from around the corner, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her smile was warm and genuine as she extended her hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Isabella. I've heard so many stories about your high school adventures with Michael." Isabella shook her hand, pleasantly surprised by the easy acceptance in Amy's voice. "All good stories, I hope," she said with a chuckle. "Oh, mostly," Amy winked. "Though there was that one about the principal's car and the live chickens." "Oh, God," Isabella groaned, but she was laughing. "I'd hoped everyone had forgotten about that." As they settled in the living room with glasses of wine, the conversation flowed easily. Michael and Amy asked about her life in San Francisco, her work in graphic design, her journey of self-discovery. There was genuine interest in their questions, free from judgment or discomfort. When dinner was ready, they moved to the dining room. Isabella found herself relaxing more and more as the evening progressed. She shared stories of her transition, the challenges she'd faced and overcome. Michael and Amy listened with empathy, asking thoughtful questions and offering support. "I have to admit," Amy said at one point, "when Michael first told me about you, I was a bit uncertain. Not because I have any problem with transgender individuals," she hastened to add, "but because I didn't know how to act or what to say. But meeting you, talking with you, you're just a person, you know? A wonderful, funny, talented person who's been through a lot to become who you are." Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." As the night wound down, Michael walked Isabella to her car. They stood there for a moment, the weight of shared history and new understanding between them.
"I'm really glad you came back for the reunion,"
Michael said.
"And I'm sorry again for losing touch. I want you to know, you'll always have a friend here, Isabella, whenever you need one."
Isabella hugged him tightly, overcome with emotion. "Thank you, Michael, for everything." As she drove back to her hotel, Isabella felt a sense of completion. She had come back to her hometown carrying the weight of her past, uncertain of what she would find. She was leaving with renewed friendships, unexpected allies, and a stronger sense of self. The reunion had been a challenge, but it had also been an affirmation. Isabella had faced her fears, stood up to prejudice, and found acceptance in places she hadn't expected. She had shown her former classmates, and herself, that she was no longer defined by who she used to be, but by the strong, confident woman she had become. As she packed her bags the next morning, preparing for her flight back to San Francisco, Isabella took one last look around the hotel room. She thought about the nervous woman who had arrived just a few days ago, uncertain of her place in this town that held so many complicated memories. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, more assured. Isabella smiled at her reflection in the mirror, seeing not just the external changes, but the inner strength that radiated from within. She was ready to return to her life in San Francisco, to her career and her chosen family. But she was leaving with something precious, a sense of reconciliation with her past, and the knowledge that she could face anything life threw her way. As she wheeled her suitcase out of the hotel, Isabella took a deep breath of the familiar air of her hometown. It no longer felt like a place she needed to escape from. Instead, it was simply a part of her journey, one chapter in the story of becoming herself. With a smile on her face and hope in her heart, Isabella headed to the airport, ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. She had faced her past, embraced her present, and was excited for her future. The reunion had been more than just a trip down memory lane. It had been an affirmation of how far she'd come, and a promise of all that was yet to be.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!